So greetings, this is Max Kalehoff with Syncapse, and you're here for the webcast, Too Many Social Metrics, Not Enough Value, and how overcoming today's marketing analytics challenges. So before we begin, I just want to go through a few details about today's presentation. We are going to be recording. We've gotten several requests for the archive, so we'll be sure to send around to everyone a link to the recording so you can share it with your friends and your colleagues. Additionally, we're going to take questions throughout the presentation, and you can either tweet them to #socialdata, or you can enter your question into the chat box on the side of your browser. And if it's appropriate, we'll answer the question right on the fly during that section of the presentation, or we'll hold it till the end and answer as many as we can if it's a broader, more general question. And so that's pretty much it. So we're going to jump in. We're going to take about 30 minutes duration here, and then save some time for any Q&A at the end. But I want to start with two big questions that really brought us here today. The first is, how do brand marketers operate in a data-driven world? And secondly, how do brand marketers adopt social for brand impact? And we really chose these questions because we, as observers here at Syncapse, we see a lot of companies sort of struggling with a changing environment, the dynamic changing within marketing organizations. We have technology change happening constantly and at a faster and faster pace. And at times it's almost overwhelming. So just the macro question of what's going on in the environment and internally, what are the forces that are impacting what we call this new marketing machine? And that question is actually going to define the first segment of today's presentation. And that's going to be led by Ted McConnell, who is one of our feature speakers today, and he is Executive Vice President of Digital at the Advertising Research Foundation, and was for years the manager of marketing innovation and digital marketing innovation at Procter & Gamble. And so it brings a very special perspective from the brand side, as well as having a very broad macro view from his experience at the Advertising Research Foundation. Secondly, we have my colleague Matt Ramella, who is a longtime marketer as well as a media professional, and leads our consumer intelligence division at Syncapse. So is one of our lead measurement scientists and media strategists. And Matt is actually going to address the second part of our presentation around looking at a very practical model for adopting social data. So we all deal with a lot of sort of minutia and very tactical metrics every day. But a big question becomes, how do you link those to brand marketing impact, to your internal brand KPIs? And then we'll follow up and conclude with an opportunity for some questions and answers. So with that, I would like to introduce Ted and let him provide his perspective on the big question, the new marketing machine, and what are the operating dynamics for marketing analytics in big brand organizations today.
Hi, this is Ted. Good afternoon, everybody. I don't have a deck. I just thought, but I do have some notes I'm talking through. But I really hope that you guys will ask questions if as they occur to you. Because I don't have a really strong sense of who you are. But anyway, I just wanted to frame this opportunity, or frame the point that we're sort of entering in, sputtering into this new world of marketing as a more highly automated kind of process. Not to say that it wasn't automated in the past, but it was relatively clunky and slow. And now what we really have that we didn't have before is the ability to put things into action in a very tight loop from a time standpoint. So I just wanted to start with this story that kind of, I guess it goes to the issue back in my P&G days. About 5 years ago, Tim Armstrong, when he was the king of Google sales, and one smart guy came and spoke to, flew in the big jet and spoke to the top marketing team, the CMO, and some of my folks, and 25 P&G top marketers in the room. And Tim stands up and he says, let me tell you the problem with you guys. You have your system, if I had to name it, I would say is perfect and launch. And the way that marketing is going to be in the future is sense and respond. So it was pretty arrogant to, I guess, stand up in front of P&G and say that. But I think he was certainly right. So what he meant by perfect and launch is this giant forward feed, a very sort of 1950s kind of feel to it. It's a big machine, right, where each part feeds downstream to the next part. And all of it, of the launch process, is sort of T-minus 36 months. You begin to, say what is your equity going to be, and T-minus 48 months you start to build the plant, or T-minus, you start your communications planning, T-minus 18 months, and finally, there's the big day, and you go to market across all media, across all your retail interventions. It all goes in, and the problem is, what if you're wrong? Okay, and how did you decide what to do anyway? And the way you decided was all entirely hypothetical. You'd say to a consumer, well, try this, if there was such a thing as a cookie that had a soft outside shell, would you like it? And then maybe later you can feed them the cookie with the soft outside shell, and they go, oh, that's great, I love that cookie, right? But the problem is that that's all measurement that's based on framing the problem exactly as you see it in your current ignorant state as a marketer or as a measurement person. So what you're doing as you move through time in a perfect and launch thing is you are basically getting the additive effect of blinders that in a focus group, how do you feel about this product? Do you like the color of the package? And meanwhile, the person's thinking, oh man, I love that dress that that my interrogator is wearing. It's just all artificial when you ask questions. And most of measurement today is, a lot of measurement, or of the guts of it, is about engineering around the biases created by asking questions. But you're still stuck with the framing that you started with as an asker. So now we're in this era of sense and respond, where you can try stuff and then watch and observe as people respond to it. And my joke about this has always been that the web is a big Skinner box, and the problem is we don't treat it like that. They're all rats in a maze, and we're creating stimuli out in the marketplace. And, we shock them if they turn left, and we reward them if they turn right. And do they learn to turn right consistently? We don't know. So this idea that what you've got is a loop, and what you're doing is making faster and faster, so that as you make mistakes in a campaign, you can begin to adapt to them. Now, direct marketers have been doing this for years. Okay, it's in their DNA. I think Intuit has 40 test and learns in market at all times. let's try the red font. Boom, did they click more? Okay, great. The package goods people and brand marketers who don't have a great KPI, of course, is the big problem. How do I know what worked in a way that I can respond to? And the answer is there's plenty of ways to know, but they're all indirect. They aren't necessarily shipments. So now enter in the world of data. So I'm going to switch gears a little. This big marketing machine is sort of driven by gas that comes from the exhaust, of our media, right? Social media and display media and mobile and whatever. We begin to see what responses look like, and this can be resonance in any number of ways. And this begins to drive our process in sense and respond. Now, the first thing you can do is you've got to be able to do is sense. And of course, if you can't respond, it doesn't make much sense to do the sensing, or how do you respond? So I advocate that as we start looking at how we engineer data into a marketing process, we start with the ways that it is possible to respond. Okay, for example, we can't go rebuild the factory, sorry. Okay, it wouldn't do you any good to know that your product was fundamentally wrong in the short term. On the other hand, if you can see from your display media or your social media that everybody who cared about hair resonated with pictures of Meg Ryan or something like that, all of a sudden you've got insights that you can put into creative. You can begin to understand your consumer better and how they resonate, and that, of course, is part of what drives your improvements as you go forward. Not only in media, how you pick segments, how you design creative. It can go to all segments. So there's the next thing to frame this is when you start getting data from social and from back from your media in digital, you don't really know exactly how you're going to apply it, but you should have a couple of predefined places where you think you might and ways to do that. So that you can put it into action. We used to say, foresight leads you to insight, which leads you into action. I think we're all pretty good at doing foresight, but if foresight doesn't lead to insight, then what the hell? And then the problem where it's broken is insights into action. If you know that your TV commercial is talking to the wrong people on day 3 of your campaign, there's really not much you can do. The whole system is stuck. Online, there's a whole lot you can do. You can start changing, how things are being trafficked, and which kind of segments you're trafficking into. And on social media, you can start to change the kind of content that you're putting in there, so that you can essentially fine-tune what's resonating and then learn from that. It's a virtuous cycle, and it basically goes on forever. This is what the community managers should be doing. But of course, the community manager is sort of a human that sits between the data and the marketplace, and that's why it's nice to have a big social platform, is because that social platform can become I guess I would say, it becomes the legacy. It becomes the learning platform for all the interventions we made and what their what their sort of causal, what happened when we did that. Because really in the end, what everybody wants to know is, I did a thing, did it work? And then we all want to do more of what worked and less of what didn't. I think that's kind of obvious. So let me just then, I'll shut up here, but I'm going to go through quick 6 points that I sort of made, I guess, in an article in Ad Age that Max liked, about what do you do differently to get ready for analytics and to start. One is you need to get leadership. There is no structure around this. We don't know how much to spend. We don't know who the leaders are. We don't know what they look like, what they know. We're talking about chief digital officers now. The CMOs are not generally into this stuff. We need to standardize measurements. Apples and oranges is a big, big problem. You can spend all your money and end up nowhere if you have apples and oranges. So you architect this junk, right? I think you got to standardize integration and platforms. Everybody's got a platform. The fragmentation of platforms will kill you by itself. There's so many dashboards, and they're not integrated. What is the general architecture for integration? As an industry, we don't know. And I'm talking about integration so that you can put something into action. So you integrate things with the action loop. Companies like Datalogix have done a great have done well with that. Develop analytics talent. Everybody hires a data scientist. Usually it's an astrophysicist, and they come in and they sure know a whole lot about data, but they don't know why they're doing anything. So you need to groom these people to understand your business, and and sort of they're hybrid kind of people. They're very rare, and they got to understand your business and then how the data fits and be able to do something about it. And then I think we live in an ecosystem. You have to collaborate openly with the measurement community because it's so fragmented. You're going to have to sew together the measures and the platforms that you need to make things work. But less big platforms is always going to give you better outcome strategically, I think, unless they're too expensive. And then social data, I think, is important, and the reason is because content is still king. Content is the meat of the social sandwich, and if you can't see how content is resonating, then you don't have jacks or better to open to get insights from this stuff. And remember that even in display media, it's content that's driving your audience. So you need to understand and learn by seeding the marketplace with the right content and then seeing what goes on. And social is a great place to do that because even publishers can't measure the resonance with their own content except by sharing, which is kind of sparse. Anyway, that's it. I will shut up, and I will ask Matt to take the helm here.
Thanks, Ted. We do have a couple questions here, which I'm going to hold to the end. So we're going to transition here to Matt Ramella, who's VP of Consumer Intelligence here at Syncapse. And our purpose here is to take Ted's sort of macro perspective of the dynamic of analytics and measurement in large brand organizations, and take it down to a more operational, tactical approach. And we hope that this section of our presentation will arm everyone with some very specific tools that you can actually go in and take back to work and apply right away. And then we'll go into some broader Q&A about our materials. So Matt, you're on here.
Great. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Ted. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Max mentioned, I'm fortunate enough to lead the consumer intelligence function at Syncapse globally across brands. And if you just move to the next slide, Max, putting social data to use is currently one of the largest opportunities for marketers today and definitely over the next few years as well. And in talking with several marketers across a wealth of leading brands, the message is very consistent. Social data holds promise, but it's also an untapped opportunity. There's the promise of richer consumer understanding, first and foremost, using social to better understand who your consumers are, how people interact with your brand in social, and how social insight can be used to shape comms planning and brand strategy. And then there's also the promise of more personalized and more relevant messages, using social data to fine-tune messaging, tailoring content to the right audiences, and evolving from one-way mass communication to more targeted direct connections. And then finally, there's the promise of greater efficiency and marketing effectiveness, and understanding how to use social to improve the performance of your overall marketing mix. And that's getting more with less, improving return on investment by amplifying brand content and creating earned media, and most importantly, connecting social media to the rest of the business to understand how your social marketing efforts can impact key brand health metrics. And that's really important. So just moving on to the next slide, there's limitless promise, yet actioning social data in ways that provide meaningful consumer value and brand growth does remain a challenge for marketers today. I don't think this is a surprise. The reality is that many marketers are struggling, and we tend to see marketers face three common pitfalls. First, it's really easy to quickly get lost in a mountain of metrics. Rapid social media proliferation is making it increasingly difficult for brands and traditional agencies to keep up. And as consumers become even more socially connected, this amount of data is exponentially increasing. And combine that with secondary networks and the rise of networks like Instagram, Tumblr, and Pinterest that are achieving scale at a much faster pace, it's becoming very difficult to standardize and unify measurement. And as Ted mentioned, there's a lot of apples and oranges in the room. It's also hard to filter the signal through the noise. And the second challenge in today's world of social measurement is that brands and agencies often fall into the trap of forgetting about the end value to the consumer. And often data is tracked just for the sake of tracking. I'm sure we can all count on one hand how many times social audience data has been used to improve the fan experience or personalize content in a meaningful way. Likely it's not many times. And most often it starts and ends in a dashboard or a series of dashboards. And that brings me to the third point, the inability to harness the right data to turn it into a valuable source of consumer intelligence. And without the right talent in place and grooming that talent, turning social data into marketing insight can be an uphill battle. And the reality is that for most brands, social has become just another mass communication channel where siloed, often subpar creative reaches just a small percentage of fans. But these challenges can be overcome. Moving to the next slide, there are tangible ways to adopt social measurement for brand marketing value. And this is where we get into the meat of it. We work day in and day out with brand marketers to operationalize social in a repeatable way that drives brand impact. And it starts with a practical 5-step framework for adopting social data. It's a framework that makes all the parts work together. It's a common approach to capture, analyze, and action the right social data to enable smarter marketing. And over the next few slides, I'll go through each of the 5 steps. Define, capture, analyze, execute, and measure to provide you with the means to improve the overall value of your social measurement and data efforts. So moving on to step 1. I can't stress how critical it is to first link your social goals and metrics to your brand objectives. If you're investing time and resources against tactical activity that does not ladder back up to overall marketing objectives and strategies, then it's a wasted effort. And what you see here on the screen is a sample measurement mapping exercise with 3 different scenarios based on differing marketing objectives. At the very top of this tree, you'll see the overall business challenge. In this case, it's to increase market share. Now, depending on your brand life stage, you can either be in an awareness phase, which is the left-hand column of boxes, or in a consideration or trial phase, the middle column of boxes, or if you're a mature brand focused on strengthening brand preference and loyalty, and those are the boxes on the right-hand column. Now, if a brand's focused on growing awareness, it's important to focus your social goals on increasing exposure. And here you look at KPIs like reach or fan growth. If you're in consideration phase, the middle column, then your social goals need to shift to focus more on engagement, measuring against KPIs like the total number of unique people engaging with your brand, or how many of those engagements are being amplified through the newsfeed to drive consideration among your family and friends across your social graph. Finally, if you're in the right-hand column, looking to strengthen consumer preference, then focusing on a loyalty program that's centered around creating positive conversation and recommendations is really key. And the most important thing to take away is that not all social metrics are valuable in achieving brand goals. Metrics need to be tailored and mapped to brand needs and then formalized. And this will create focus and common understanding across internal stakeholders and also agency partners and set you on the path to improve success. Also important to note that when doing this exercise or any measurement mapping exercise like this, ensure that you have the right combination of skill sets and talent in the room. So that's combining people who have analytics skills with people who have brand marketing expertise, and that will get you to the most valuable output and success metrics. Step number 2, capturing and processing the right social data to turn faceless fans into segmented audiences. It's important to not only have a consistent approach here, but to also collect data that will be relevant to your brand strategies. In this example you see right now, the brand's looking to identify highly engaged brand advocates who are also medium to heavy users of the product. So let me explain this a bit further. In order to create a richer consumer profile or consumer segments, 2 main sources of data needs to be collected. In the left-hand circle, user engagement data is categorized to help you understand which fans are currently engaging with your brand on social versus those who have lapsed. Also understanding how recent and frequent a user engages with your brand, along with their sentiment, will further allow for an understanding of fan disposition, whether a user can be classified as a champion or a brand advocate or a detractor. So that's the left-hand side. In the right-hand circle, a second set of extended data can also be captured. And this information can be in the form of additional allow permissions collected via an app, for example, or can also be in the form of brand-specific survey responses. These will be form questions that ask frequency of product use or a person's willingness to recommend the brand. This data on the left is then combined with the data on the right through a user ID matching process. And the key takeaway here is that to capture and use social data, you need to do so in ways that will be intelligent and in ways that will help you to gain a better understanding of your consumer profile. And evolve from tracking brand performance at the aggregate page and post level, which is where a lot of brands start, and that's fine to build a foundation, but to move to focusing on people-centric data. And to start by identifying simple use case to get a quick win under your belt. That brings us to step 3, analysis. So to recap, you've defined your focus goals and KPIs. You've captured the right data based on your brand use case and needs. And now it needs to all be brought together to create actionable audience clusters. And the analysis in step number 3 answers the question, who do we as a brand want to connect with? There's a need to define a range of consumers and then prioritize based on the largest brand opportunities. This can be done through a number of ways, through social engagement data, through interests and activities, or consumer behaviors and attitudes, usage occasions, etc. The list goes on. And it will vary based on the brand objective and the data that was captured in step number 2. Now, as you can see in this visual example, this brand's social audience is equally comprised of both competitive users and brand loyalists, which are 2 of the largest circles. And from an interests and passions perspective, some people are clustered together as sports fans, while others are film enthusiasts. The key takeaway, it's likely your social fan base is quite diverse. It's not a big homogeneous blob. And using segmentation analysis to better understand who your social audience is critical. And that leads us to step number 4 of the framework, which is putting social data to use to improve consumer experiences. One way to do this is to select your top 3 to 5 audience segments, as we just identified in the previous step, and begin to target different creative to them. And this is just one example. As Ted was mentioning, there are many others. And in Facebook specifically, you can take all of the user IDs or email addresses from, say, your sports fan segment and upload them into a custom audience. Your brand's sports fans can then be modeled to create a much larger lookalike audience, which is in essence other people who are similar to your sports fans. Now at this point, you'll be able to target this much larger group of people with sports-related brand content through sponsored newsfeed stories and other paid placements. The key here is leveraging smart ads targeting technology to programmatically publish and optimize these multiple content streams and creative assets across your different audience segments. So whether it be sports, music, product focus, offer-based messaging, etc., more relevant messages to the right people to improve marketing effectiveness at scale. But how does a marketer know if this approach and other approaches like this has paid off? In the fifth and final step, it's paramount to close the loop and measure the impact of social activation on both marketing efficiencies and key brand metrics. The approach is simple. Couple social performance metrics, like on the left, with brand research metrics on the right to better understand total ROI. And that's looking at efficiency plus effectiveness. On the social efficiency front, measure performance in relation to decreased costs, whether it be cheaper fan acquisition, lower cost per engagement, or higher conversion rates. These are all standard media metrics. And on the brand effectiveness front, measure performance in relation to key brand metrics such as preference, purchase frequency, or willingness to recommend. When measuring, it's important to track performance by specific consumer segments. And this is a key takeaway, because you want to understand, for example, if the sports-focused audience group that you've been targeting with unique creative actually drove higher brand lift versus, say, a music-focused audience group that you've been activating against. And the learning from this survey-based research can then be fed in to fine-tune and improve your broader social marketing and data measurement strategies. So it's an optimization loop. To conclude, I'd like to leave you with 3 concrete takeaways when looking to implement a practical model for adopting social data with success. First, challenge your team to turn social data into purpose. Begin by aligning social marketing metrics and data needs to specific brand objectives. Complete a measurement mapping exercise, similar to the one I went through in step 1 or a version of that. Second, work to connect data to insights. Invest in the right talent to analyze social data with the goal of better consumer understanding. And most importantly, action that insight by connecting more relevant content with the right people at scale so you can move the needle on brand health. And third, evolve beyond measuring social media in a silo and begin coupling social performance tracking with traditional research to understand how social activity contributes to brand lift. At the end of the day, it's about building brands, not just getting fans. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Max, for any questions.
Great. Thanks, Matt and Ted. So we have a couple of questions here. I've consolidated a few of them and would like to hit on those. And if anyone would like to submit any, you can do so in the chat next at the side of your presentation browser, or you can tweet it to hashtag social data. And so the first question that I wanted to ask was actually to Ted. That has to do with change agents. So one of the key points that you noted had to do with leadership, marketing, data analytics leadership in the organization, particularly as the world becomes digital. So what's the criteria for this to happen? We see various efforts like the CIO talking to the CMO. We have a new role of the Chief Digital Officer, and these seem to be somewhat figurehead roles that are emerging. But what's if leadership and change agentry is something that's going to be necessary for big marketing companies to evolve faster, to accelerate in their prowess of analytics. What does that leadership criteria look like, Ted?
Right. It's a good question. There's a lot of people working on this. I know Forrester's going to do a study on it pretty soon. I say let form follow function, and I think that so decide on the what before you decide on the who's going to be in charge, and that's going to come from marketing. I think when you innovate, you have to think about what's needed and what's possible, and I don't think the CMO knows what's possible. And I don't think the CIO knows what's needed. And so, it's going to be a collaboration when you decide the what is it you want to accomplish. And in terms of who gets the R, for this, or accountability, or whatever you want to say, I say my vote would be for marketing. And the reason is that I heard somebody say the other day that those who know why will always be the bosses of those who know how. And marketing knows why. So put marketing in charge. There's my answer.
Okay. Great. So a follow-on question to that, Ted, is how do you transcend best practices in large, sprawling, or decentralized companies? It's perhaps easier for or maybe it's more difficult for a more centralized company to deploy best practices. But how do you begin to change culture across brands, across markets, across regions when it comes to adopting best practices or innovation around digital marketing measurements and analytics? You're asking how to change the culture of giant corporate machine, which is probably more than a PhD. And if I knew the magic, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be rich. But I think the practical way to go at it is to be able to demonstrate extreme value shift. And also, I think you have to know what has to change. Really, does a no have to change to a yes? Do different people need to communicate with each other? So you got to look at the organizational map, and you got to look at what needs to actually happen in the end. What is the outcome you desire? And then try to engineer the organization to do that. But sort of broad brush attempts at culture change don't work. The machinery of big corporations is designed to be very, very efficient. And in fact, it makes it very resistant to change, almost impossible to change. Something like 70% of all corporate initiatives fail because of this exact factor. I mean, Kodak couldn't come around. They knew 20 years ago about digital cameras, or 30 years ago, and they couldn't change, right? So it's very hard. But the nice thing is bits flow rather fluidly and rather fast across corporate boundaries and national boundaries. And so, actually analytics, making data available can begin the seeds of culture change. It's actually more of a cause than an effect. If you can get people looking at the same stuff, and maybe they'll have different decisions about it, but then they'll have to talk about it, and suddenly you've got different vectors of communication going on, and that's a good thing. The marketplace will change a corporation, and if you bring the market closer to the inside, that's another way to sort of create the seeds of change. But I'll shut up now. Matt, maybe you could address that question as well. You've deployed some of the your model that you've presented. You've actually deployed that to a number of large companies and brands. Maybe you could talk about some of the challenges and some of the key factors that made socializing, developing, and deploying into actual business practice a sound data mapping and model that you described earlier.
Yeah, and I think Ted was right on when he said that to scale best practices, you need, in essence, a common language. And that starts with standardized measurement. So that's the foundation of how to replicate best practices from one market to the next. So that's really important if we go back to step number one, defining your measurement framework in a consistent and common way that's standardized across markets. Because only if you have that foundation can you then start to compare results and understand which markets are performing better and how they're driving success. So then you can then replicate it and scale it. And this creates healthy competition, which I think is another key factor in having a culture of best practices globally in a complex company where there's not a lot of time for people on a day-to-day basis. But if you can create healthy competition to have different brand teams or markets looking to outperform one another, and again, it's measured the same way, then I think you can get a lot of traction.
Great. So Matt, another question for you, having to do more specifically around social metrics. One of the challenges is that each of the social networks wants to define their own rules. They want their own metrics, their own reach metrics, their own engagement metrics, but they make it very, very difficult to derive any commonality or insights from. So it creates a lot of chaos.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with this issue of many different metrics across every single social network that comes along?
Yeah, it's a big challenge. It's not going to go away anytime soon. It also affects the advertising perspective as well, because there are different need of ad units specific to different social networks. So this is a common issue across both measurement and ad placements and media buying. And there are ways to circumvent it. You're still going to want to look at channel-specific metrics to optimize in the channel. That's very important because those are the metrics that are most valuable in the channel. But there's also need to have a layer of common definitions and common metrics that are multi-channel across the channels that matter for you and your brand in terms of how you're activating and where your consumers are. So common metrics like comparable engagement rate or comparable reach or exposure metric. Earned media value is a proprietary metric we use here at Syncapse. That is multi-channel as well to help you understand the value of the exposure of your brand content and the value of the exposure as a result of your fans interacting with that content as well. So I think there are a number of high-level metrics that are important across multi-channel. So you can understand engagement rate across Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube marketing activity with one single KPI.
Got it. Thanks, Matt.